Okay, welcome, welcome. Here we are, continuing our typical development review and some treatment ideas here with Rhonda and Shannon. So here we go. We left off last time at about 6 months, and we did 4 through 6 in our last visit. And so we'd like to kind of review 6 a little bit more, and then come back and look at 6, 7, and 8 as we move forward. So we're going to go ahead and share our screen here so that you see what we see. And let's go ahead and start a slideshow. This slide. Here we go. Okay, so 6 months. We talked about this a little bit last time, but let's review it again so we remember where we're coming from as to where we're headed. So those 6 months old, as you recall, in their prone position, just love to do that Landau response or that kind of swimming full extension on their tummies. We should see a long neck, so you can see baby up here, that his scapula are down and together. He's using those lower traps. He's really lifting with his spine as well as his neck, so there's not hyperextension there. He's even lifting, you see his glutes are contracted here and hamstrings, everything is just working to keep him upright. And then he's just gonna vigorously move his arms and legs. If you think back to that 3-month-old age, we said that the 3-month-old started to change their movement. So we were no longer writhing. Well, 6 months is also showing that same kind of movement. So if you see a 6-month-old who is in full extension, but let's say their legs are together, and their arms are maybe extended with elbows back like this, and you see neck hyperextension, that's not the same thing as this free movement sort of extension that you should see at 6 months. They should be moving in a variety of flexion and extension throughout their extremities. And they should be able to maintain that head up while they're doing that. So that takes a lot of core strength and stability in order to do that. And then you'll start to see some of that side-to-side lateral flexion as well. As they're doing that pivoting around on their tummy, you're gonna see some lateral flexion in kind of a gravity eliminated way, right? So they're in this horizontal plane, and then you're gonna see some shortening on one side or the other as they're doing their pivoting around on their tummy. Okay, so that is the prone position. Let's talk a little bit about supine. So as you remember, in the supine position, as baby's laying there, they have their head in midline. They can reach their feet at 5 months, put their feet in their mouth. And at 6 months now, for the very first time, they can lift their head up against gravity. So we're gonna demonstrate a kind of anticipatory pull to sit. So with a 5-month-old, you know, that head would stay in line with the body, but with a 6-month-old, they can actually tuck their chin and lift their head as they're coming up into a seated position. So that's an exciting thing that a 6-month-old can do. You will see a 6-month-old laying in the crib, seeing a caregiver come into the room and those arms go up and the head lifts saying, pick me up. And that is the supine position. Now, 6-month-olds don't really love being in supine. So like, I can do this, but when I'm laying in supine, think about their interaction with the world. It's really looking up at the ceiling. So 6-month-olds, when you go to do diaper changes and you're ready to play with baby, they're very quick to move out of this position and roll into another position. So that 6-month-old is just gonna be a moving target in the horizontal position. So they're gonna be rolling all over the place, they're gonna be swimming in their Landau, and they should be getting the beginning of body riding on body, which is for the first time, that rotation throughout the trunk. So you'll see as they're rolling from one side over, that we'll see usually one part of the body go first, and then the rest will follow. So it's not that log roll anymore. We're finally getting some rotation in the trunk, which again is just a big mature step in learning how to, what's that? Okay, there you go, that's good. I can move us down a little bit too. There you go. So big mature step in being able to control each segment of that whole vertebral column. So you think about the cervical spine and baby rolling over the head, but not rolling over the entire body, saying, no, I'm gonna keep the rest of my body flat on the surface. And then maybe the hips come over. And then the shoulder stays back. And then maybe they finally bring over their shoulder and roll all the way onto their side. And that is more of a segmental, more of a mature type of roll. Now the 6-month-old up and sitting, we talked about something else exciting. I'm gonna grab a toy while I talk. But the other thing that 6-month-olds can do in sitting is just sit with some low support. We can use a mouse. We're gonna use the mouse. We're gonna use the mouse as a toy. So 6-month-olds can, for the first time, volitionally grasp an object, move it to the other hand, transfer it over there, and then release it on purpose onto the surface. Pretty exciting for a 6-month-old. They're also sitting with just very little bit of low support usually. So they can sit in that kind of wide ring sit, which our baby has a little bit of a difficult time doing. Oh, very nice, baby. And 6-month-olds, you'll often see them going from a prop sit up into that high guard still. So we'll see the hands coming up, and again, that's kind of locking in the spine, keeping a lot of stability there in the middle. So we'll see that a lot. And 6-month-olds are getting pretty good at that sitting, getting pretty close to sitting by themselves.
You have it on there too, the protective extension forward. So you might start to see it in sitting in terms of forward for sure. But if you wanted to really see if it was there, then you would hold baby up kind of horizontal and then just go like a quick movement down towards the surface. So by 6 months, if we go down to the surface quickly, their hands should abduct, elbows extend, fingers will hopefully splay a little bit in that sense, and then they get their hands down on the surface. Okay? So that's by 6 months. So they're starting to learn how to protect themselves.
Right, and so that stays throughout life. So we should see this with 6-month-olds on.
Yep.
So starting at 6 months, but really for the rest of our lives, we hope that when we're falling forward, we put our hands out to catch ourselves instead of startling and holding our hands up like this and maybe getting a little jittery, which is what we'd see in a less mature kiddo. Or sometimes with like a 3- and 4-month-old, we wouldn't see any attempts at all.
Exactly.
They're just gonna go with the flow, just flop right over. Okay, finally for the 6-month-old, we can talk about standing. So up and standing, we said at 4 months, we're able to just now hold with hands. So here at 6 months, they've really enjoyed standing quite a lot. 6-month-olds sometimes don't even want to bend to sit because they're just so happy in that standing position. And they love to bounce. So you'll see over and over bending and straightening, a lot of repetitive closed chain. This baby doesn't like to do it. Closed chained standing activity and baby squats. So baby squats, super important in development, lots of strengthening happening. You know, it's hard when your knees are on sideways to really, I don't know if you guys can see that. Sometimes we crack ourselves up. Oh, there we go, here we go. He had flamingo legs. Okay, oh. Here, he might need a little. There we go. Good 6-month-old.
There you go.
Very nice, Betty. Okay, let's see what the 7-month-old has to offer. So as we move to 7 months, we're looking again in that prone position. We're gonna start to see that baby who was working on sort of swimming in that position and just moving their arms and legs and pivoting around. Now they're typically able to start commando crawling. So commando crawling or belly crawling is obviously with their belly on the ground, and they're going to use their forearms typically and knees and sometimes toes to go ahead and push themselves forward. So there's a wide range of how this happens for babies, especially when they're first learning. We don't expect them to be perfectly reciprocal every time, always looking the same, but we do see, you know, a variety. We should see a variety of different movements. So we don't want to see legs hanging back in strong extension the whole time.
Having a hard time with head control.
We don't want to see the legs not participating at all and just being in strong extension with that plantar flexion. We don't want to see that only one side is moving. We want to look for some symmetry and some variety. But I think a nice thing that you were showing right there would be a good thing to talk about, which is the forearms.
Yeah. So like facilitation of belly crawling and 4-point crawling, creeping on hands and knees is really, it can be really challenging.
Yes.
And so parents are like, how do I get them to do this? And there's so much happening because it's opposite arm, opposite leg, and all of these things are happening. So a couple of things to think about when we start to do things reciprocally, let's say that baby's going to pull more with the left arm. So if left arm tends to be a little bit more in front, and we're going to have right leg kind of coming underneath, you can facilitate it a few different ways. But one thing to kind of first keep in mind is all of a sudden we have a weight shift over to the left side, right? So as soon as that right leg pops up, it comes over here, and just like Rhonda was talking about, we're starting to get lateral flexion. So, and you'll see it in varying degrees, right? Depending on the movement and style that they use, but you should start to see lateral flexion. So here we are, we're starting to really move more out of the sagittal plane. So everything up until now has been really sagittal plane dominant flexion extension. So rolling, super important, you know, some form of crawling. There's been lots of stuff about crawling. Some people are like, you know, don't let them walk until they crawl. Some people will say, you know, well, that would be my one, I guess my one beef, right? Is like, you know, some kids will skip crawling, and it's not the end of the earth. We can get it in other ways, hopefully, but if I want to facilitate this, I could do it a couple different ways, right? If I felt like their arms were working pretty well, but their legs were just staying stiff behind them, and all we were getting was like this, kind of a pull, and they're dragging themselves across, there's no reciprocal movement down low, then I might say, okay, arms, I'm gonna let you do your own thing, no problem, but I'm gonna assist with legs. And so I could put a leg up and just provide a little support and see if they did that. So just get the leg up there. Once they pull with the arms, the leg's gonna follow, but try and catch them in between so that you can weight shift them over, get their next leg up, and if their arms are doing their job, then they're gonna pull again with their arms, but the leg is still involved, okay? So that might just cue them to, hey, kick your legs on, let's get your legs involved. What if the legs are going a mile a minute and they're here, but you know, head is down and arms are not doing their job? When you watch videos of kids combat crawl, they do like a pretty cool thing with their forearms. So typically they will start in some sort of a position like this, but their forearms are pronated, okay? And so as you start to, if you want to facilitate it, then I'm going to give them input down into the floor. And as they start to pull, you'll typically see supination of the forearm. So they kind of roll over their forearms, and you'll see that happen as they pull.
So
yeah,
it's symmetrical this way.
Yep. So it's kind of a natural thing that happens. They move so fast, sometimes it's hard to see it, but that might be an area where you can facilitate forward movement and activation of the arms. Because what we really want is those forearms down on the surface, and they're going to help pull, that whole arm is still in contact with the surface. Okay, and then the next one, and if we wanted to, we could help them pull over their arm. Okay, and then pull over their arm. Okay, cool.
Okay, good stuff. So that is a little bit of commando crawling. So that is really a 7-month skill. So if we have a kiddo who's 7 months old and not moving about on the surface, this would be a great activity.
Oh, like that picture. Look at that picture down low.
Oh, beautiful.
Talking about kind of, look at all the things that are happening now with the spine. So she's got some asymmetrical, she's got some, you know, elongation on the weight-bearing side, some shortening on the non-weight-bearing side technically, right? We have things in contact with the surface a little bit, but still where her weight is. And so, and she's just like super dynamic in that position, like it ain't no thing but a chicken wing.
That's right. She's doing all these complex movements, and it's just so simple for her, which is awesome. You can see that she's kind of newish at this because you'll see a little bit wider base of support here. So we have this knee a little, this hip a little bit abducted, and this shoulder on the left side a little bit abducted. But look at this nice lateral flexion throughout here. Like Shannon was talking about, that equilibrium response that she's having, and even extending that arm out to keep her balance is just fantastic stuff. Good stuff. And from this position now, your 7-month-old may be moving from quadruped into a sitting position. So typically when we see the precursor to actually doing that movement is sometimes just a rocking. So being up in that quadruped position and rocking. And it's super important, as we talked about before, to not just work on static positions. So when we were working on prone, we weren't working on just prone on elbows or prone on arms. We were working in that position, but constantly moving and changing the demands based on gravity and weight shift. So if you're thinking about this baby now being up in a quadruped position, the same thing applies. You want to keep that baby moving such that they are dynamically adjusting to the weight shifts constantly throughout their body. So one way to get them into that quadruped and then moving in from prone into sitting, let's go through that.
Yeah. And watch typical kids get into quadruped too. So it's just fascinating. It depends, like, do they have a toy in their hand? Then they're going to do it differently. What does that toy look like? And they'll come up with all kinds of crazy ways, which is fantastic. So I think that's a good thing to remember when we're working with our kids, is that there's not necessarily one way, but let's make sure that whatever way we're helping them choose, that we're involving both sides and we're, you know, kind of doing things in that direction.
And if you're doing it symmetrically one way, you may want to do it from an asymmetrical direction the next way.
Yes.
So and variety is the spice.
Yeah, and this is where our hand dominance as a physical therapist is really going to come into play. So if you have kids who can go from prone to quadruped to sit and only go over to the left, let's say, it's maybe because you're right-handed, and every time they come up, it's much easier to go with the right hand, kind of guiding them down to sit. So we have to just make sure that we're doing both sides. But yeah, so you can do it a variety of ways, but let's say, you know, depending on where that child needs a little bit of help. But one of the first things is they've got to be able to get, for this baby needs to be able to get their head up and get their arms in a better position. And then we'll start to worry about the legs. So that's probably where I would start, but you could do it any way you wanted. I would probably start to help them just give a little bit of an anchor so that their head pops up, and just start to tuck that arm in. Okay, if I am going to go this direction, then once their arm's in, I'm just going to help shift their weight over, and hopefully I'm going to pause a little bit every step of the way. So if I do this, hopefully baby's like, oh, cool, this leg is free, and just kind of pulls it up. Okay, if I have a difference in this leg position, which is what I want, then I can block this foot just a smidge so it doesn't go anywhere, but we need to weight shift back over to the side. So if I do that and I help baby start to weight shift back over, then here we are. This leg is still extended, and hopefully now I've got enough weight on this side that this leg kind of just wants to come, and so it comes forward. I would say in this position, it's easy for us to forget about where that knee is. A lot of times the knee is too far forward, okay? So we're like, okay, cool, they're in quad, but look at where their knees are. So that's not a super, super dynamic position. If that's all they can do for the moment, then take it. That's not a big, that's okay. But what we're working on is knees need to be, okay, in line with the hips a little bit. A little bit of flexion's okay, excessive flexion there, but that's what we're hoping for, okay? And then it's rocking back and forth, hanging out, okay? So input down into the arms, and it just depends. Like if that vector says, hey, we're gonna sit back towards our heels, it's down and just a hint backwards, okay? Baby's gonna already come with it. If it's forward, it's down into the surface, and then the vector changes from maybe that wrist towards the fingers. So it's down and towards the fingers. And then baby's just gonna come along. And we're gonna do as little as possible just to kind of keep them going. So they're gonna rock back and forth and have a good time.
That's right. And then moving from quadruped to sitting.
Yeah, you can do it multiple ways. If I'm giving input through the arms, all I have to say is, okay, our input is down right directly through my hands right now. And if I want them to sit on their right hip, then my direction is now down and kind of towards their wrist, headed in that direction. Okay, once they're here, I'm going to kind of try and let go as much as I can and see if they can bring themselves up. If not, then you're just in a position where you can do it Give them a little bit of help. Yahoo!
Good job, baby.
They're 7 months old. They're clapping by now. They can give themselves praise.
So it's really what Shannon just demonstrated. If we're going back really to our PEDS 1 courses, we're talking about that mobility, stability, controlled mobility, and then the skill. So that's why we do that closed chain rocking, because that is your controlled mobility. Remember, it has to be closed chained and it has to be dynamic. It has to be a movement. So we know that is the sequence in which we learn mobility, is to first have the range and then have the stability in that range. And then we need to do some controlled mobility, some closed chained activities before we get to a skilled movement where you can actually lift a limb up off the surface. So that weight shifting and that rocking back and forth in quadruped is absolutely something we see in typical kids. They do this automatically, but we can also facilitate it with therapy to give them that same idea.
Yeah. If they can maintain this on their own, go abs. Abs is such a nice place to facilitate this, right? So if you have a kid who's really shooting forward because they're like, woohoo, but they can't handle this in between, if they can tolerate and have the strength to get through their arms on their own, then just come at the base of their rib cage and you can facilitate there too, right? So like if they're shooting too far forward, just, hey, no, like kick your abs on. You need to be strong here, and it'll pull them back a little bit. So you can use their abs. You can really use anywhere. I would try and stay off of the hips if you can, because we tend to be too heavy-handed if we can hang on to the hips. So try and stay off the hips. Shoulders are awesome. Use the abs. See if they can do that. Use your legs as little blockers if you've got kids who are going to abduct and just kind of, you know, frog out on you. But just try as little as possible.
And I would imagine here, not being an OT, but I would imagine this would be a great place to start working again on those hand arches. Having your baby in that, especially side sitting is so phenomenal for that, so that you can have one hand a little more free and using skilled mobility, and then your left hand for this baby is really working on the weight bearing and working on getting those hand arches, strengthening within the intrinsics of the hand.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this would be a great precursor activity to other things like grabbing toys and sort of things like that.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to share that screen again. Oh, I see a chat message. When you're in quadruped, what do you do if baby is collapsing at the upper extremities or is nose diving? Okay, I think we hit that one a little bit. Did we answer that question for you, Sarah?
Nose diving kind of forward. We talked about that one.
Okay.
Later.
Yeah.
But collapsing at the arms, a couple things you can try. If you think that it's just a pure strength issue, you can always take, make it easier, right? So I can say, okay, we're going to just work on arm strength. We're going to work on, I'm going to put you over my leg. You've got some extra support, but you're going to collapse down. And then you really want this thing that's up here. And so you're just going to start to push up and you're going to reach for it. And I'm going to help you. And you're going to say, oh, awesome. I love my mouse. Then it goes down on the floor, or they face plant because they just are too weak. And then it goes right back up. Okay, but your input is down into the floor. Try and not lift baby up. What we're saying is, this is your arms, this is what you're using. So push into the surface. I'm not going to lift you, you got to push.
That's a great point. Anytime you're doing facilitation, is that the more you're lifting, the more you're telling your client, hey, you don't have to do the work, I'm doing this for you.
Yeah.
A nice way that we have sort of taught that to other people in other venues is, for instance, my mom, who's a speech therapist, will sometimes say, if you want a client to move their foot back up on the footrest, put your hand here and help them lift in this way instead of putting your arms here and lifting. Mm-hmm. So if you put your arm underneath and lift, just like with this child in quadruped, you're saying, hey, I've got you, you just relax. Whereas if you have a hand that is pushing down into the base of support, say moving from the surface here to onto my butt, like, oh, that means I'm lifting up and I'm shifting my weight posterior. Yes. So same thing in quadruped.
Sarah, keep trying to facilitate from shoulders. See if that helps. If they're in quadruped and I hang on to their hips, I feel like I really don't have much control at all what they do with their upper extremities. So I would say try from the shoulders. You know, you might have to go down to elbows and help them get extension. That's okay, but try and stay off the hips. See if maybe that helps. Good question.
And Maddie sort of answered it as you demonstrated, but also added something else too. So she says you can bring the surface up so it's not as extreme, which is what you did with your thigh, and then shift their center of mass posterior. Depends on if it's a sensory aversion or a strength impairment as well. So thinking of those hands touching the surface and how comfortable baby is with that.
Yeah, and so like bringing the surface up to, like Maddie's talking about, you know, that's where the ball is so awesome, right? So if straight quadruped or, you know, full gravity, right, is too much, then get them here and just roll it back. Okay, so now I can push up and I can be successful and I can have a great time and I can play with it here and see if they can still maintain it. But I can manipulate how difficult this activity is, especially on a ball. So yeah, good idea.
And then if it's sensory play with textures and see what works.
Yeah, totally.
So you might need some priming too of the hands, some deep pressure and some sort of hand holding, some squeezes in order to prep that baby to then be able to push into the surface with their hands.
Clapping, high fives, forced high fives, those are the best. Right?
Yeah, they are.
Give me a high five, no? Okay,
come on. Yay, there we go.
We're doing it anyway.
Yeah, we would never do that. Never, never. Okay, I'm gonna get our screen back to sharing. Sorry, hold on. Here we go. Okay, cool. So 7 months, side lying. So we kind of prepped you already talking about side lying when baby, in this bottom picture in particular. Side lying, baby now can use this functionally for the first time. Not that we usually use phones, but here's my toy for this baby. But side lying, because they're able to really laterally flex their trunk against gravity and move in that frontal and sometimes transverse planes a little bit better, they can use this side lying position really functionally for the first time. So instead of just using it as a transition place between supine and prone, they're now just kind of hanging out in that position and saying, what does the world have to offer in this new place?
Awesome, awesome, awesome position. Side lying, I don't know, I mean, well, I'm sure there's other positions that require so much balance and co-contraction, but you can manipulate, like think about their entire body is on this little thin line, right? So talk about flexion and extension control, oh my gracious. And then lateral flexion, like Rhonda said, the neck, the trunk, all the way down, depending on what you want them to do. They can work on their shoulders, right? They can push back up into extended arms. You can come down, like Rhonda said, they're starting to get a little bit of rotation. You can work on that there. And then they have to push back. I love side lying.
Side lying is so good. Also think about the hips and side lying, all that glute med work against gravity and moving from like that side lying into sit and how really hard that is. If you guys have done yoga poses where you're doing like a side plank, and how much more challenging that is to be on your side with such a much smaller base of support. And we're just not used to using that all that often. So it's a new challenging position, and babies like it at this age. They're usually kind of mastering that.
Yeah.
Super, super important.
If you have kids who are stuck in flexion, right? So they're stuck in the sagittal plane, go to side lying. And then it's like, I don't know, it's kind of like a spotlight to what is an issue, because there has to be such a good balance between flexors and extensors here that you'll really see it. So if you have a kid who you're kind of stuck with and all they want is sagittal plane flexion or extension, try side lying and see kind of what pops out.
And this is really where kids get stuck often who have movement impairments, is in that sagittal plane. So we'll see it with kids, you know, way after 7 months, that they're just really stuck in these flexed or hyperextended positions. And side lying is just such a great way to get out of that and really challenge balance of muscles. Okay. Let's move to, independent sitter. So 7-month-old sitting there all by himself. And he doesn't even really need to keep his hands on the surface. Yeah. So he's playing up in space. He's got things going on. He's moving and shaking in that sitting position. And this is now his, close to probably his favorite position is still prone and being able to move around on his tummy. But he's getting so comfortable in sitting that he'll hang out here for quite a while. And then still stands and bounces at 7 months. So they'll love bouncing at 7 months for a while. I mean, through standing for a while, through 6 months and 7 months. At 7 months, you may start to see babies pulling up into a stand. So it's probably a bilateral symmetrical pull, and it's not very often that some of our early standers are going to start already pulling up into a standing position. And usually that's bilaterally symmetrically. So 2 hands up. See if we can simulate this, huh? Yeah, I'll keep you in view.
So it's, they're here and they're ready to go. And then, it's like bilateral symmetrical.
It's really hard, you guys. Just try it. Just try it. But it's really just kind of both feet and both hands. It's like doing an elevated plank is really kind of what it looks like. And they usually have to have a grip on something, not just like up against a wall or hanging onto a sofa that you can't grab onto. It usually is a full body flexion with the arms and, lifting of the trunk off the surface. A pretty primitive.
Which it still looks a lot like sagittal plane, right?
A lot sagittal plane.
It's still flexion and just kind of bilateral extension, but your hips are still both flexed. So it's a lot of that kind of stuff, which our kids can get stuck with.
Right. So we don't want to see that lasting too long, but it is kind of cool when it first happens. Okay, we're moving to the 8-month-old, who is a master sitter now. When you look at an 8-month-old, they've got sitting down pat. They just love to be up and sitting. So you'll place them on the floor in a prone position, and they're probably going to move pretty quickly into a sitting position. They don't hang out in prone anymore unless they're crawling and moving around on the surface. Yep. So here we go with our 8-month-old up in that quadruped. So and they move to sitting. That's wonderful. So before at 7 months, you remember that they were doing sort of a belly crawl. We typically just call that crawling. And then what they moved to at 8 months is now a lifted trunk creeping. So this is hands and knees, belly up off the surface, reciprocal creeping, typically at 8 months. So this is something else that can be challenging to facilitate. Although your baby is really cooperative right now.
My baby's super cooperative right now. I'll go this way. Okay, so again, this is a toughie. This is a toughie to facilitate. Watch your knees and your hips. Okay, you're going to have a hard time facilitating this if this is what you start out with, because you're not getting any hip extension at all. So you're staying so far flexed that you go, okay, hand, you're like, oh, knees already there. There's just like not more to go. So if they're too flexed, start with their knees back underneath their hips, okay? So I would say start with that. So if I go left, then I'm going to help weight shift them a little bit over that left side, and this guy needs to come forward. If you can't get much initiation from them, exaggerate the legs. Let this leg stay pretty far back, flex this leg pretty far forward, okay? So that this arm feels like, okay, it's my turn next. Then it's a weight shift onto this side. It's forward onto that leg. Onto that arm. Now it's this guy's turn, okay? I'm gonna exaggerate it so that I can kind of remember too what's happening next, okay? And then it's over. Go, buddy. Okay, and then you just facilitate it backwards. I'm just kidding. Yeah.
Not a bad idea. Not a bad idea.
Not a bad idea.
Could be kind of
That
fun.
would take me a hot minute for sure to figure
So 8-month-olds, belly up off the surface, moving forward, moving into sit quite easily from that quadruped position. They may move from quadruped to kneeling without hands for support. So they typically will be in this crawling position, but in the crawling position, their hands are really not free to play. So the reason they crawl is to get somewhere. And the reason they want to get somewhere is usually to get into something. So they see something interesting, they start crawling forward, and then they want their hands free in order to grab said item, usually, you know, a remote or something they're not supposed to have. And so once they get there, they want to use their hands. So what do? They move from quad to kneel.
So you're gonna weight shift them backwards, which you can do wherever you want, but I can go from here, from shoulders if you want, and weight shift them backwards so that their hands feel light, right? The weight comes off of their hands, and then ta-da!
Ta-da! And then they have their hands free to grab said forbidden item. What's nice that Shannon just demonstrated as well, compliments, is the pause. So she's not going through this slowly just to demonstrate to you what happens slowly so that we can all keep up, but because once you do a weight shift, you got to wait for the response. Otherwise, we're just motoring them through these movements. So she's weight shifting baby back, and then she's like, baby, do you feel that your hands are light? Do you want to lift them up? Do you want to try and extend your neck more because you're really looking down at the surface? Maybe we're going to call, you know, attention up higher, have mom or dad call, and allow for that baby to have a response so that we're not, it's really easy when we are so much larger than our clients to manhandle and to just take them through the movement. But what we really want to do is sort of pause and ask for the movement and then see if they can give it to us.
Whoa, need some more ab work.
Yeah. So again, once we're in a new position, we're not hanging out there statically. Even if baby is playing with a toy up here with their hands, so they're up here playing with something, we can be back there helping them with a variety of weight shifting, keeping it active, having them move against gravity in different ways, which is going to cause different demands of those muscles. And just keep it going, keep it active. Good job, baby. They may move from kneeling to stand by pulling, and some babies even get a little bit of a half kneel going on. So I'll be the surface.
Okay. So if baby wants to stand, sometimes we start to see this kind of a dealio. Like it's not necessarily straight in front, but they're getting the idea that, oh, I'm going to put a foot up. It might be a little bit behind or, you know, more abducted than typical, but they'll put a foot up and then off they go.
Exciting stuff. And now 8-month-olds also do some cruising. So cruising is standing while holding on. And cruising for an 8-month-old looks very, very frontal plane. So it's really just 2 hands on the surface and direct sidestepping. And it's not necessarily a super organized, I'm going to step 1 foot and then the other and 1 foot and then the other. Yeah. It's sometimes like a weight shift and a tap tap and a move back and it doesn't have to be a regimented left, right. It's kind of all over the place sometimes, and then hands might move a little bit too far and we might get off balance in one way or another, and then a foot might come back. But it's very much abduction, external rotation, and sidestepping. So this is such a great place to not rush it. So we as a society really enjoy getting our babies' first steps, and first steps without holding on are really what we tend to prize culturally. But think about the muscles required for that cruising and that sidestepping when we're working on still shoulder girdle, and also just hips and abs and trunk. We're working on glute med, stabilizing that pelvis. Just some great things. Think about the feet and having them desensitized against the surface. There's just so much good stuff that happens there in that cruising position that we don't want to rush through it. And we just want to tell parents it's really amazing that they're doing this, and we don't care if they let go anytime soon. They may be able to let go with 1 hand, but it's usually very brief. And then when they move out of that stand, it's not a controlled, slow, lower to sit. Right. So that's something else we kind of work with kiddos on.
Yeah, but at this age, it's fine. If they see something on the floor and they want to get down, they're just going to and plop down. no stress express. So I think that's okay too for our kids, reminding parents that that's a natural stage for them to kind of have a little, we obviously don't want them to get hurt. You know, first do no harm, that's our rule. But it's okay for them to have that little plop. Gosh, think about everything that they get, all this input that they get when they kind of hit that surface with the tush. So that's okay.
Yeah.
And they've got short enough legs where, you know, it's not going to hurt like it would for us.
Right, exactly. So this kind of hit home for me when I was first working with peds in the hospital, because we're so used to seeing toddlers and infants just kind of plop down and not really think anything of it. But when babies have been protected, maybe they've been in intensive care for a long time and they're just starting to learn to cruise along their bed rails, they've been protected their whole lives, and they haven't really been allowed to have those momentary losses of balance and really learned how to fall. So learning how to fall and learning how to fall well when you're this close to the floor, super helpful. Yeah. I wish I really remembered how to do that now, but my falls are not that graceful, but it's a great skill to have. And so I talk to parents when I'm treating often about allowing baby to fall safely. So showing them how to sort of protect the head if they're going down, but it's okay for their arms and legs to hit the surface. They usually don't get any bruising. They fall right on their bum, and it's a great proprioceptive experience for them. Yeah. They really get a lot of information about where their body was in space in that moment. And without falls, we really don't learn. We got to fail forward. Got to fail forward. Okay. If you hold an 8-month-old's hands, we will see them walking with like a steppage style gait. So I will hold these here. And what we'll see is, oopsie, not quite that. Big steps.
Whoa, whoa.
Okay, I'm gonna hold it the front.
You need some more trunks.
Big high steps.
Come on, buddy.
I'm doing flamingo walking. Big high stepping. So baby wouldn't learn to move body weight forward. I mean, wouldn't be able to on their own push their body weight forward and weight shift without those arms being held. So they're really just moving their legs kind of up and down in space, kind of like infant kicking, interestingly. It looks a lot like infant kicking, but they'll have more pronation, more plantar flexion and hip flexion and knee flexion than would be typical for a walker. I think we're kind of running out of time here, so I think we'll stop at 8 months and we'll reconvene next week. Thank you guys so much for being with us.
Let's skip next week.
Oh yeah, let's skip next week. We'll see you in 2 weeks. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Yes.
Okay, thanks guys.
Bye.
Oh.